Aurel Brown is a professor of international relations and political science at the University of Toronto. We're going to be talking about Prime Minister Mark Carney's recent forays, his trips to Europe to build stronger relationships. Is this substantive or is it window dressing? Welcome to the interview, Aurel.
Thank you very much.
So let's start with a brief overview of sort of the 35,000 foot view. We've said we're not deepening relationships with our integrating our economies further with between the U.S. and Canada. We're going to pivot to Asia and Europe. What do you make of that?
Well, in terms of goals, it's something that may indeed make sense because we have been very hard hit by tariffs. We have been disappointed in what we thought was such a close relationship with the United States. And the expectation that there would be a quick agreement and that we would be given that special treatment that we think we deserve because we are the closest ally to the United States. We have those historical ties. Those have not materialized. So it makes sense for Canada to try to build resiliency, to try to diversify our trade, our economic relations overall with the rest of the world, not to have such a heavy dependence on United States. It's like a stock portfolio. You want to have a diversified portfolio because it gives you a better prospect of safeguarding yourself in very volatile situations. Now, that goal and bring that goal to fruition is something that creates also difficulties because this is not the first time this has been tried. We can go back to Pierre Trudeau. You may recall that Pierre Trudeau said, no, we don't want to rely that much on the United States. He certainly had very bad relations with President Nixon and reached out to Europe. We were going to have much stronger relations with Europe. And then it did not really change. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask, what is the difference between intent and effect? And in this case, there could be a problem.
Or what would a true or a legitimate or a reasonable further integration with Europe or stronger ties with Europe, what should it look like?
It's supposed to take place at various levels. So let's say at the military level, the Europeans are engaged in a program called ReArm. They have realized that Europe has to be much stronger. They have to contribute more to NATO. They are spending vastly more sums of money on their defense. They're moving rapidly towards, most of them, towards the 5% expenditure, 3.5% hard money on defense, 1.5% on infrastructure because of the threat from Russia and the general international volatility and the massive failure of the United Nations. We in Canada have put a tremendous amount of stock in the UN, and the UN has failed in the same way as the League of Nations has failed in 2014, in 2022, in many other ways. So defense in terms of alliances is really crucial. So Canada would need to participate much more strongly in that. Mr. Carney promised to do that. What has he delivered on that? We are barely going to meet the 2% expenditure next year, and that seems to include the $2 billion that we're giving to Ukraine. So the Europeans are looking at that, and let's not forget that Chancellor Merz, who's a man of substance, said to Mr. Carney, it's great, we are reaching this agreement. This is the joint critical declaration of intent. But he said, please go visit our shipbuilding for submarines. You should buy our submarines. Canada needs something like 12 submarines. Did we sign an agreement to buy the submarines? No. We are still looking at whether we buy from Germany or whether we buy from South Korea. Well, the Germans also look at what actually they get in return. Now, in terms of economics, again, we could do more as far as Europe is concerned, but we also have to understand certain problems. The Europeans protect their agriculture, the common agricultural policy. We are a major agricultural producer. So we have to see what are our chances of really exporting our efficiently produced grain and so on. So we're left with energy. And that's where there are all sorts of prospects. And that's where we see this kind of declaration, joint declaration of intent. But we need to look at it very closely.
Is it fair to say then that the efforts from Prime Minister Carney to date have been primarily around intent? And off camera, when you talked about it's almost like a Trumpian approach. And I think what you meant was that Trump goes in and he bullies and he uses tariffs to soften up his opponent, and then they come up with some kind of a deal. And it's the headline that he worries about, not so much the substance of the deal. And are you suggesting that maybe Carney's taking the same approach?
Well, I want to be as fair to Mr. Carney as possible because he is relatively new to politics, although I have a feeling that someone who rose through the banking ranks in such a determined way, it must be an awfully good politician in all sorts of aspects. But you will recall that Mr. Trump had made these announcements. Japan is going to invest $500 billion in the United States. The Europeans are going to invest more than $500 billion in the United States. We have something like $6 trillion coming into the United States. When we look at what exactly is being put in the United States, even though there are some very major agreements there, actually we can see them, but they're nowhere nearly close to what Mr. Trump has said. Now, in the case of Mr. Carney, we're not even at the level where we have some solid investments from that. That is, we don't have major agreements. If you look carefully at what has happened in the trip to Germany, and Germany is the crucial country in Europe. Mr. Merz, the Chancellor Merz, is a man of substance. He's not like Macron, who just chases headlines. He's about policy. And so what agreements have been reached? This was one company that has an agreement to sell more copper and some minerals. The other two companies that were along, they have a memorandum of understanding. And so by now, one would think when you have such a major delegation, when you put all this effort, when you have all this publicity, we have a right in Canada to expect some more significant substance in the economic realm as well. And also to have that understanding that in international relations, politics, economics, and strategic contributions are all intertwined.
So I have to confess, Aurel, that when I was prepping for the interview, reviewing some of the agreements that Canada has entered into with Germany under Prime Minister Mark Carney, I got the impression that existing agreements were being deepened. There were new defense agreements nested within them, like the Canada Europe trade agreement. Uh, but what I'm hearing from you is that a lot of this is not smoke and mirrors, but it's not, doesn't have any substance. And the only thing that really matters here are the firm agreements to purchase subs or to spend money or to, some firm commitments. Is that correct?
Well, we need to be fair because sometimes what you have is an expression of intent, then you build on that. And so to that extent, one might say, well, this is sort of part of the legwork, the preparatory stage. The problem is that there's urgency. That is, that we don't have the luxury of saying, what, in 5, 10 years' time, 15 years' time, we will really diversify. We will really build up our defense. So it's sort of like when you look at Canada's defense policy under Mr. Carney, they said, we absolutely will meet the 5%. When are we going to meet the 5%? In 10 years' time. Who knows who's going to be prime minister in 10 years' time? We're barely going to meet the 2% by the end of this fiscal year, which is in March of next year, whereas the vast majority of NATO states already met that last year. So we're way behind. The contrast between promises and what is delivered is as great as one can imagine in Canada. And I think the Europeans notice that. And to shift trade, to diversify, is a very difficult task because geography is immutable. So if you look at one of the most successful exporters in the world, traders in the world, it's the Netherlands. It's a relatively small country, but the total trade that the Netherlands conducts is significantly greater than Canada, even though it's much smaller. But this extremely clever, flexible exporter, where do most of the exports and imports come from? Well, Germany, Belgium. So geography makes a difference. So we can't just change our uh, relationship with the United States from whatever it is, 75 to 80% down to 30 or 40%. We can do something more on the margins, but we have to proceed fairly quickly on that because if we are going to have enough resilience, if we are going to want to stand up, if this notion of elbows up, which now has disappeared, uh, then you have to be able to have that resilience.
Um, Oral, the I take your point about urgency, and it seems like the pivot to Europe and Asia is a long-term solution to a short-term problem, which is Trump's tariffs and other aggressiveness towards Canada. And my understanding is that with many, with the EU, with many of its member states, and with Asian countries, Canada has various types of agreements and has had for a long time. Would those be by themselves, without a lot of tinkering and improvement, not be enough for us to make these kind of concrete agreements that you're talking about?
We can try to build on them, but there's a cost everywhere. Let's say we want to build stronger economic relations with South Korea, which is a very successful economy. The South Koreans also want us to buy their submarines. So there's a connection. And so the Germans build excellent submarines. They are selling them to Norway as well. They're a member of NATO, but we need those subs urgently, and the South Koreans can build them faster. But if we buy them from South Korea, we could improve our economic relationship with South Korea. I think the Germans would be awfully disappointed, and I don't think they would be advocating for us that strongly. So when you look at this, declaration of joint intent, you see words like explore, strive, promote, not agree. And so these are promises. So Mr. Carney has a talent. It really does have a talent to make possibilities seem like certainties. But that's not the reality.
Isn't this part of a Canadian tradition, Oral? I mean, we've long been known for in many places, like in many areas, like climate, where we talk big and deliver small. And is Carney? Like many Canadians, thought that he was a break from the Trudeau government, but from what you're saying, it sounds like he's continuing many of their policy and strategic approaches.
He is, I would say, a better communicator in some ways when he talks to foreign leaders, coming in with business and with banking credentials. He might have more credibility, but the problem is that credibility can evaporate very, very quickly when you don't deliver the goods. And when you make promises to everybody, and when you raise those expectations, and just look at the already in Canada, we're talking about there's going to be major construction in the Port of Montreal, also in Churchill, Manitoba, and how we open that up. And that takes years and years and billions of dollars of investments. And certainly it helps with the electorate in Quebec and with the Aboriginal electorate. But if you don't deliver on that, if you just say, well, we're working on it, and just wait a few more years, that, it's kind of almost like a combination of the fecklessness of Trudeau and the bombastic promises of Trump, delivered in a, good business suit and in a moderate tone.
So, Oral, let's wrap up the interview this way, and maybe we can sum this up in that Carney has indicated we're supposed to have a new strategy in Canada. He's raised expectations. He's done some of this, he's made building relationships, whatever. But at the end of the day, what metrics should Canadians use to judge the effectiveness of his work with respect to Europe?
We have to look at actual agreements. Are we going to be able to sell a lot more? Are we going to get a better break in terms of exporting our agricultural products, where we are extremely efficient in some of our industrial products? Are we going to have a stronger military link with Europe that is productive, that will help our industries? Are we going to have better collaboration and cooperation with the Nordic states in Europe in terms of Arctic defense? And those are measurable metrics. And the problem is that if you make promises to everybody, in the end, you may not be able to deliver what is necessary to anybody. So you have to be much more parsimonious. And so what I see, unfortunately, and I really would like to see Mr. Carney succeed because it's important for Canada. And I raise the skepticism because I think we need to signal to Mr. Carney that we'd like to see some substance, that we don't doubt his good intentions, but he has to deliver. And if you promise something to everyone, you can't deliver that. So you have to be focused and you actually have to bring back solid results. And yes, 100 days is a short time, but now we're well past the 100 days. And I think we as a country are entitled to ask the leadership, what are you going to deliver? And when are you going to deliver it?
Aurel, this has been fascinating. Thank you very much. If you're okay, I'm going to come back to you in the coming months for updates to see if, in fact, Prime Minister Carney is delivering the way that you suggest that he should deliver. So, thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you.